Old Harry Merton had been caretaker at St. Cuthbert's Comprehensive for 31 years, long enough to know every sulking radiator, every treacherous floorboard, every corridor that breathed when the wind changed. After 5 o'clock, the school belonged to him. He said it often enough that people stopped questioning it. It was the Thursday before half-term when he first heard it. A low, steady thrum, like a generator buried somewhere far below the foundations. He was locking the east corridor, 8th door on the left always stuck, when the vibration travelled up through his boots. "Old pipes," he muttered, though the boilers had been off since Easter. He found the hatch the following Tuesday. It was tucked behind the caretaker's store in the Victorian wing, where the walls had been patched so many times they resembled a badly mended quilt. One flagstone sat a fraction higher than the rest, its mortar pale and new. He wouldn't have noticed it if his torch hadn't caught the glint of fresh metal around the edges. The stone lifted far too easily. Beneath it, a ladder disappeared into darkness. Harry stood at the opening for a long moment. At 63, he'd learned that curiosity was a young man's indulgence and caution an old man's reward. But he'd also learned that nothing good ever came from a freshly sealed hole in the ground. He climbed down. The tunnel was brick-lined and impossibly dry for something sitting below the water table. His torch picked out a corridor running the length of the school and beyond, vanishing under the playing fields. Every few meters, a bare bulb hung from a ceramic fitting, none of them lit. At first, he thought it might be an old air raid shelter. There were dozens scattered across the county. Then he reached the chamber. It was circular, 40 feet across, with a vaulted brick ceiling. In the center stood a stone basin, like a font or a wellhead, carved with figures that made his eyes ache to look at. Kneeling children, he thought at first, though the proportions were wrong. Around the walls, arranged in neat rows, were small wooden desks, child-sized. Each held a slate and a stub of chalk. The thrum was louder here. It seemed to pulse from the basin itself. On the nearest desk, someone had written, in a tidy, old-fashioned hand, "The next lesson begins when the last pupil arrives." Harry felt the skin on his neck tighten. The slate was still warm. He might have dismissed it as a sixth-form prank if he hadn't heard footsteps in the corridor behind him. Light, numerous, accompanied by the murmur of small voices and the occasional adult shush. Harry ducked behind the basin as the first child entered. There were perhaps 30 of them, dressed not in blazers and ties, but in clothes from another age, pinafores, caps, heavy boots. They moved with the quiet, automatic discipline of children who had learned to fear correction. At their head walked a woman in a long grey dress, her hair pulled back so tightly it sharpened her features. She did not see Harry. None of them did. They filed to their desks and sat, straight-backed, hands folded. The woman opened a book. When she spoke, her voice sounded like a recording played through a wall. Lesson 47, The Giving of Names. The children lifted their slates. The basin began to glow. Something rose from the stone well, pale, many-limbed, faceless in any way he could describe. It reached for the nearest child with a tenderness that was somehow worse than violence. The child did not flinch. When the creature touched its forehead, the slate filled with letters that shone like moonlight. One by one, the children received their names. Harry understood then, or thought he did. The disappearances, the old records. Every few decades, a child vanished from the county and was never found. And every few decades, the school quietly expanded its role by a handful of pupils with no past and no parents. They learned, they grew, they aged after a fashion. And when their lesson was done, they walked back into the dark beneath the school and were not seen again for years. He was still watching when the woman turned and looked directly at him. "Mr. Merton," she said, "you are not a pupil." The children turned as one. Their eyes were kind and impossibly old. Harry began. "You have kept this place well," she said. "The doors oiled, the floors swept, the old ways kept open by simple care. We had begun to think you might be one of us." "I didn't know," Harry said. It sounded feeble. "That is the nature of caretaking." She smiled. "You tend what you do not understand, in hope that understanding will follow. Would you sit? It has been a very long time since we had an adult student." Harry thought of his flat above the boiler house, the single bar heater, the tinned soup and the 9 o'clock news. He thought of 31 years of closing the same doors and switching off the same lights, waiting for the building to tell him what it was for. "One lesson," he said. The woman gestured to an empty desk. The pale thing in the basin reached out, patient as a tide. Harry sat. They found his torch the next morning, still shining on the flagstone, which had been replaced so neatly that no one believed it had ever been moved. Harry Merton was never seen again. But the school thrived. The boilers ran warm in winter. The east corridor door never stuck after that. And if, late at night, a cleaner heard footsteps beneath the floorboards or the murmur of children reciting what sounded like a name, they learned quickly to switch off their radios and walk away.